right, so I'm going through the Weinstein Hi. So I'm going through the Weinstein tort claim that has been issued to the college. Now, what a tort claim is, so far as I understand, is not the intent to sue, but rather the proof of the grounds for sewage or suing for a sewage suit. Anyway, so there's this like 200-page document filled with letters, stuff full of letters back and forth between him and the faculty. And there's this Peter Boehmer guy who, if you've seen my Grossman video, is, I believe, the millionaire. And he forwarded a letter from the Jewish students regarding recent campus events. And that's what I'm going to read. Peter, please read this powerful letter by some Jewish students. And then the copy paste. A letter to the campus and Bret Weinstein from some Jews bent on the destruction of white supremacy. A note on Jews as people. Jews are an ethnic and religious group that is amorphous, spanning races. It must be recognized that all Ashkenazi Jews are not white, and many Jews of different cultural backgrounds experience both anti-Semitism and anti-black racism or other manifestations of white supremacy. A bunch of dashes. We want to talk about the ways that Weinstein is positioning himself as a Jew to invalidate the claims of racism being raised against him. We want to examine Bret's invocation of his Judaism as a prop upon which his anti-black language and behavior has rested. We must speak about this because if we remain silent, we accept this unacceptable usage of our shared history. This is about Weinstein, but it also about white Jews acting in complicity with and upholding white supremacy, passively and actively. We seek to counter Bret's narrative and de-center his place in the wider struggle against institutional racism on campus and beyond. Now, so far, and for the remainder of the document, they do never once specify Bret's supposed racism, nor his language, nor his behavior. They make no specifications. And watch as they focus on Weinstein and they get more and more general. Just watch. These past weeks, students have attempted to hold various people in positions of authority and power accountable for the ways that they uphold racism on campus. Which ways exactly? Administrators and teachers have shirked responsibility and accountability, period. Instead, they don't specify in which ways. Instead, they have acted as though they are the ones being attacked, as though they are not in positions of power. All right, positions of power. Now, remember that word power. Bret has attempted to position himself as a victim, that is, to say that he doesn't have power. It wouldn't take much for Bret to apologize, but he has held fast to his seemingly innocuous position of victimhood. And in doing so has highlighted some of the ways that liberal racism functions. All right, hopefully we'll get specific here. Here we can learn something about how not to react when claims of racist behavior are raised against us. Defend yourself? Something that Bret may be trying to get to when he talks about himself as a Jew. See, they don't specify anything. They just go to the next point. Something that Bret may be trying to get to when he talks about himself as a Jew is that Ashkenazi Jews have not always been considered white. Okay, this is true and is very important to think about. This is true and is very important to think about. What kind of a statement is that? What was the process of assimilation that brought some Jews into the folds of whiteness? What was the cost? Whiteness is not a singular, tangible thing. It is a construction that evolves as power changes hands and as global structures change with them. Change with the hands? Wait, what? It is a construction that evolves as power changes hands and as global structures change with them. So I guess the hands are what's changing, or the power that changes hands. The assimilation of most Ashkenazi Jews and some Sephardic Jews into whiteness is not a single event. One cannot point to a time or day when their bebe abandoned Yiddish or traditional clothing and say, "This is the event of assimilation." Assimilation requires, among other things, a constant of an other to be compared to. Well, we aren't white like these Scandinavian Christians, but we aren't as not white as black people. Therefore, we must be white. Sorry, everything that's happening with hands is happening in quotes. This is what I suppose the Ashkenazi Jew is doing when he's trying to figure out if he's white or not. Whiteness is flexible enough to expand its definition of who is welcomed into its fold when it's convenient in maintaining the social order it imposes. I need to highlight this because this is exactly what they're doing with whatever it is that is equivalent with whiteness in this argument. Whiteness is flexible enough to expand its definition of who is welcomed into its fold when it's convenient in maintaining or enforcing the social order it imposes. Some Jews, Irish people, Italians, etc., are welcome to be white as long as black people remain the targets of racialized violence. For us to be white, have access to whiteness, power, some groups of people must continually be othered, like what they're doing to Weinstein, denied access to power, like what they're doing to Weinstein. They're just saying that he's in a position of power, therefore he should be denied power, because the position of power or whiteness is what they're actually against. So they're trying to deny his access to power by saying that his very access to power is grounds for him to be denied power. If I'm reading this clearly. This is how white supremacy functions, by creating structures of power, of exclusion and othering, and in doing so, relying on anti-blackness. Okay, so maybe we can just say that this is how anti-fascist supremacy functions, by creating structures of power, of exclusion and othering, and in doing so, relying on anti-whiteness. It kind of holds, doesn't it? However, the fact that Jews have not always been enmeshed in whiteness does not negate the fact that today many Jews in this country benefit from and uphold white supremacy. Additionally, we know that the past experience of anti-Semitism and oppression of our ancestors does not mean that we are incapable of reproducing harmful behavior. Yes, a human being can be an asshole even if their ancestors had to suffer from assholes. This is very true, and they should hold that in their thoughts as they go forward. Much less does it mean that we as Jews are the singular authority on what does and does not constitute racially motivated subjugation in a different historical and social context. We can understand that those who experience trauma can perpetuate harmful behaviors and reproduce traumatizing conditions. So they do recognize this. So when Bret says that he cannot possibly be racist because he knows what it is like for his people to be oppressed, what we hear is a negation of responsibility and a gross misuse of the history and suffering of our ancestors. The lived experience of white Ashkenazi Jews and the lived experience of black people in the U.S. is drastically different and cannot be equated. And by so doing, Bret refuses both experiences. Anti-blackness and racism in general are pervasive amongst white Jews. In combating white supremacy, we are combating the roots of anti-Semitism. So what exactly is the root, then, of racism? What exactly is the root of racism? That is the real question, right? And in my reading of many of these documents, the root of racism is what they call othering other people, dehumanizing other people, which is the chief tactic at work in much of this anti-whatever behavior. So on. White supremacists have attacked our cultural centers, cemeteries, and bodies, and many call for our extermination. This is true, and I in absolutely no way, find that permissible or acceptable or anything that I stand for. And I don't know who I'm talking to when I say that. And when I'm talking to people who are going to use me or abuse me, I'm talking just out of humanity. I think that we shouldn't dehumanize each other. That's kind of what I stand for. Jewish rejection of their agenda is both an act of solidarity and self-love. Where anti-Semitism is found, invariably we also find all sorts of racism like Orientalism and anti-blackness. Anti-racism is a Jewish issue. Anti-blackness is a Jewish issue. We cannot ignore Jews of color, black Jews, or the fact that all Jews also have a stake in destroying white supremacy. And Bret's ignorance of this is not only embarrassing, but also dangerous. We have been told many times, without justice, our faith means nothing. And may now say something similar. Without justice, our history means nothing. So what do they mean by justice? Last week, there was a swastika spray painted on a seminar building on campus, the one in which Bret Weinstein teaches. Of course, Bret's actions are not an excuse for anti-Semitism, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who painted that swastika or for what reason. Where there is anti-Semitism, there is racism. The way to address racism is to be willing to engage in honest conversation about it and be willing to admit to where it lives within us. Bret's refusal to engage in conversations about his own racism has put many Evergreen students in legitimate danger. They do not specify at what point Bret refused to engage in conversations about his own racism. Perhaps by saying, "I'm not a racist," was in fact him denying his own racism. And that's unexcusable. If you say that you're not racist, that's unexcusable. That's you actually denying the conversation of pinpointing where the racism is in you, which might have a grain of truth in it. It perhaps has a grain of truth in it, but it is so on the offensive that it doesn't actually help human beings to engage with each other in intimate dialogue. That line of attack actually solidifies somebody's racism or somebody's otherness by treating them as another, by saying, "You are guilty of othering. You're guilty of othering." No, I'm not. Yes, you are. You denied it. You're guiltier. That is precisely the tack. That's my argument. I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. I'm saying that the mode of anti-racism is, in fact, the stronger you are against something, the more you are for it. And that's a really weird thing. It's a really weird thing. It has to do with the way that passion works. I'm just throwing this out there. It has to do with the way that belief works. We magnify that which we train ourselves on. The more we pay attention to it, and the more we let our passions invest ourselves, even in againstness to the thing, the more stronger that thing becomes. Whether in our imaginations or in reality, as a reaction to our behavior. That's why I think that anti-oppression and anti-racism is actually not the right way to go about doing it. I think that there's a better way that we can go about doing that. But the thing is that we've come to a point in a dialogue, some people in our dialogue are so caught up in againstness that even if you say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be so against, maybe we should just treat people more like human and model good behavior, then that shows that you're complicit or you're actually for this thing that we're against. It's very dangerous. We, Jewish people, wish to express our unequivocal support and solidarity with undocumented Latinx, Black, MENA, and Arab, Native, disabled, and trans and queer students, staff, faculty, and residents of the surrounding Olympia area. We're for all these people. Bret Weinstein is wrong, and so we're against that. We're with all these other people against him, right? That's the point of focus for this togetherness. It's a togetherness that's formed out of againstness. And this is something that I have a problem with intersectionality, because it's a banding together of these marginalized groups, right? Nominally to support these marginalized groups, but in entering into this pact with everybody else, you have to accept everybody else. You have to accept the philosophy of everybody else. Your identity is slowly eroded, or your self is given over to this identity, which is then shuffled into this big mass, and then the strongest people, the strongest voices in that mass will actually become dominant of that mass, because the mass will have to form into an organization, into some sort of hierarchy. And if the coalition is formed out of identities, all these identity units, then I think that the trend is to make a hierarchy based on those things. An inverted hierarchy, like we saw with the protests, or some sort of other hierarchy of oppression hierarchy, or whoever acts the most traumatized will be given perhaps the most power. I wonder, that's kind of a thesis, and I don't have any data from that, but that's what I'm gathering from doing these investigations. Bret Weinstein is wrong. He has put you in danger, and we will not allow him to hide behind our histories in order to dodge responsibility for his abhorrent and reprehensible words and actions. They don't specify which ones. Presumably, this is the Tucker Carlson appearance. Okay, this is all in caps. No cops on campus! Fire Bret Weinstein! Black Lives Matter! Signed, some Jews bent on the destruction of white supremacy.